This morning I'm going to wander. I don't know, so you don't have to make dirt work. I'm the last minute sub, and it was a late assignment, and I worked yesterday, so it's not the most thoroughly prepared sermon I've ever done. And so I'll invite you to just come with me on the journey I took in thinking about this scripture. And maybe we can all arrive at something. I remember high school. For some of us, that's a distant memory. But I don't know about you, but I had to read a lot of stuff in high school when I took my literature courses. And some of them were rather thick. Remember Don Quixote? Probably the thickest one was Moby Dick. I'm not sure I ever got through it, but I worked at it. Anybody remember the first line in Moby Dick? Come on.
My name is Ishmael.
Right. It's one of the most famous lines in literature. Call me Ishmael. And I thought about that when I saw this story about Hagar and Ishmael. And I began to wonder, why did he pick that name for that character? He's essentially the narrator of the story. But he is a kind of a isolated character who's always felt kind of a loner, and every once in a while he goes off on these sea trips to kind of reinvigorate his life. And I thought, well, that has something to do with the character of Ishmael, who was put out alone with his mother. And then I read this story again in the Bible, a very strange story. I think we'll all agree. As you remember, Sarah couldn't have a child, and so she offered her servant, an Egyptian girl named Hagar, to her husband, Abraham, and they had a son, Ishmael. Well, then, the whole miraculous story about Sarah conceiving in her old age, and when the angel told her husband she was going to have a child, she was behind the door laughing. Yeah, right. But she did. And so she had Isaac. And then she began to get jealous of Hagar and Ishmael because Ishmael was the firstborn. And she wasn't happy about that. And she goes to her husband and she says, let's send them off into the wilderness. In the first place, it doesn't make me feel very good about Sarah, but the next part is even worse. God agrees to that, which makes me ask some very important questions about God here. What's going on? And Abraham agrees to it, apparently rather reluctantly, but as many husbands can attest, once your wife puts her foot down, if you keep disagreeing too long, you run into trouble. So he takes Hagar and her child out into the wilderness and leaves them with a little bit of food and some water. And she wanders around in the wilderness. There's not much to eat out there or drink either. So eventually the water runs out. She decides they're both going to die. She doesn't want to watch her son die of thirst. So she puts him under a bush and walks a distance away so that she doesn't have to witness it. Then we have this miracle. God decides to look after them and provides some sustenance for them, and she looks up and there's a well. Now, we don't know whether it's a well that she just missed and God pointed her to, or whether it's a well that was miraculously provided on the moment for her, but there it was. She got some water, rescued her child, and they went on to live. Now, there are a lot of things about this story. One of them is it's one of those ideological stories that are told to make us understand why something is. And the why in this case is, why is it that Arabs Ishmael was the father of the Arab nation. And so, you know, if you really want to trace all that down to the present time, you can understand why the Arabs are upset. I mean, it was the Hebrews who first, you know, put their ancestor out in the wilderness. So, you know, if you're playing that game, who started this war, I don't know. But it's unfortunate that we're still fighting that after all of these years. The other thing about it is it tells us some interesting things about who's in and who's out. Hagar was obviously who was out. And why? She was an Egyptian. She was an African. Maybe more importantly, she was a Gentile. And so she was not entitled like the others were. She was a slave. And if we think slavery has ended in our day, there's a few countries you need to go look at. And there's even some of it happening in our own country. And so that made her less than, what, human. And thirdly, of course, she was a woman. Well, we know all the problems associated with that through the years. And of course, since women have full equality now, you know, it's just a sample of all the problems that we've had through the centuries. I think particularly a lot of African American women, especially single mothers, might identify with Hagar out there wandering around trying to make do for herself and her child. And a lot of people who may not actually be slaves feel themselves to be part of some kind of inferior class and feel put out because of that. And then the woman thing. Do I really have to spell this one out for you? Women are always put upon, have always been. And even now, you know, the wages for women do not live up to the wages for men, even for the same thing. Let me tell you a story about myself. As a young pastor, I was single, of course. But even before anybody else, or even myself, discovered I was gay, it was clear that I was single. And somehow, young single pastors didn't seem to require the same things that married pastors did. So when it came time to make the bishops make assignments, he would say, oh, well, you know, I know this place doesn't pay as much as some others, but since you don't have a family, that's all right. No, it wasn't all right. But what choice did I have to keep my mouth shut and go, you know? So, you know, I understand in a teensy little way, because being single could be in the same class with a lot of single women, that, you know, you don't need as much. In fact, we sometimes need more because we don't have another person to help with things. That didn't seem to occur to them, that, you know. So Ishmael, here he is, becomes the patriarch of the Arab people, more particularly as you go on in history among the Arab people. Muhammad, of course, came from that crowd. And even the Bab, I don't know how much you know about the Baha'i faith, but the Bab was their prophet, and he came out of that too. I have great respect for the Baha'i faith. They think everybody's got part of the truth, and nobody's got all of it. I'm pretty convinced of that myself. But we're still fighting these struggles. The Muslim-Jewish struggle, well, we all know that one. And I don't know how many presidents in a row have struggled to find peace between them and gone aground on those rocks. And so it's somehow always their fault that they can solve it. I don't think So you can't blame the Republicans and the Democrats in this case. They all tried, and they all failed so far. We're still fighting the oppression of women, and particularly in some cultures, it's very, very, very oppressive. And it's still fighting the inequality of certain classes. If you belong to the wrong tribe in some parts of Africa, you might get wiped out. And the oppression of women, I mean, all you have to do is look at that ridiculous kidnapping of all those young girls in Africa. I mean, and somehow they thought that was acceptable. It's a mess. We're still fighting all of those races, and we're still fighting racism everywhere. Even though we claim that we're past that, we're not. And then we've added a few in the years of other kinds of oppression to worry about. Income inequality, and everybody says, well, there's no solution to that. Yeah, there is, but nobody's willing to deal with it. We're still fighting militarism and the idea that anything can be solved with a few bullets and a machine gun. We recognize homophobia, which has always been there, but then we had a name for it. All of these are rooted in the same cause: the need to put the other down, the need to feel superior. And if I can't feel superior because of my race, then I can feel superior because I'm a male. Or I can feel superior because I'm a Christian instead of a Jew. Or because I'm an American instead of something else. I mean, we can find all kinds of ways to make ourselves superior and put other people down, and that's what that's all about. Have we made progress? Yeah, let me tell you what I'm doing this week. It indicates some progress in some fields. I'm leaving tomorrow for a week in Portland, Oregon, to stay with two friends of mine, John and Paul, who've been together for well over 35 years. I introduced them back in about 78 or 79. And they've been together ever since. Paul, I grew up with. We were best friends in junior high, high school, college. I met John later. Paul was living in D.C. at the time, and I was making a trip to visit him. I hate long car trips, especially by myself. And John, who was a school teacher at the time, we were having a meal together at one of the local gay bars in St. Louis. And he said, I don't know what I'm going to do with my summer. I said, I have a suggestion. I hate long car trips alone. Come with me to D.C. He said, well, I have some friends in New York. I'll go to D.C. with you, then I'll go on over to visit them. It's fine. So we walked into Paul's apartment the night we got there. He had dinner ready for us. And the two of them ended up in bed together, and they've been together ever since. I would never have predicted it, because I did not have those two pegged as people who would get along, but they did. So all these years, and way back, I don't know when, about 30 years ago, I actually did a service for them. Of course, it wasn't legal. In the meantime, they moved to Portland about 25 years ago, and Portland established domestic registry, and they joined it. And now, lo and behold, Oregon has legalized gay marriage. So I get a call from them a few weeks ago saying, we want you to come to Portland and make it real. So, of course, I'm going. Paul's a little older than actually, and he's about to turn 70. I mean, they waited all these years, and now they can do it. So that's progress on one front, but I'm naive to think that because we've won one little battle, that we won the war. And I'm not sure the war is winnable, but all we can do is keep fighting on every front. Sexism, racism, homophobia, economic issues, military issues, all of those, all we can do is keep fighting. And so I struggled around with a conclusion to this sermon. A conclusion which you'll be glad to hear is already coming. And I couldn't come up with a conclusion except to say that it is left for each one of us to write our own conclusion to the stories of inequality and putting people down that exist around us. And when we see it, speak out. When we can do something, do it. When we have a responsibility that we can use to help, do it. It's all the stuff that we claim to really value as Christians. Love one another. Don't let anybody feel inferior in that space around you. Make sure everybody is treated equally by you, at least. And if you see them being treated unequally by somebody else, confront that somebody else. Say, that's not right. And it's not just, and it's not fair. And it needs to stop. So I don't know what Jen would have said about Hagar and Ishmael. Probably better than what I had. But those are my thoughts on the subject with just a little preparation. And I hope that they're helpful to start your thought process and think through those issues. And it's been so